Well, hello there, folks. Welcome to Miyagi Mornings, episode 112. And I really love today's question. I don't know that I'm going to be able to exactly answer it the way the guy asking it wants it answered, because it's going to be one of those, like, it depends on a lot of things type things. But I'll do my best. I think it's going to be great for everybody. Here's the question. He said, I'm looking for a short show to share to older grades 8 through 12 homeschool students on building the Excel spreadsheets, particularly for different life events. You've discussed for college versus direct career, which we have already built, but other events include quitting a job, moving to or out of the city, giving up a higher paying job versus the cost of living, military versus civilian jobs, having kids, etc. And of course, opinions vary on what to include. What factors do you find important to include, what to exclude? Any tips or tricks you can suggest for research, building the sheet, or for formulas? On formulas, I'm just going to say that I think you build the formula to the need. And if you're not familiar with the mnemonic device, and I'm sure this guy is, with please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, it's actually in the notes below, so I don't have to go into it in the video today. But it's basically the order in which you run a mathematical problem. You know, parentheses and exponents and like that, right? Multiply, divide before you add, subtract, etc., right? And if you understand that, then you can build a formula in Excel for almost anything. Excel is just basically automated mathematics. It allows you to group data sets and group numbers and auto-fill and auto-add and auto-subtract and do the work for a fairly complex formula once and use it over and over and over and over again. So my first tip, and I'm sure I know this person that asked this question, and I'm sure he's already used this, but I found a few years ago an Excel tutorial. It's free on YouTube, and it's long. It's hours of tutoring, I guess you would say, or lessons or education. And it starts out very, very basic, and it goes all the way through to very complex things. And I'll say this, I don't care how experienced you are or not experienced you are with Excel, you will benefit from this. I spent 15 years of my life in sales and marketing and business development. I built models and forecasts and did takeoffs and estimates and project estimates and things like that for clients, for my own company, for myself, for 15 years. And when I went through this tutorial, there was a lot of, I know that, but I learned a ton of things, including some really basic things that, because I'm self-taught, I had already figured out other ways to do them, and I found faster ways to do things I already knew how to do, and I found I could do things that I didn't know I could do. And it was really valuable. So I would say everybody should avail themselves of this. And I want to also, before I try to answer this question, say a little bit about the value of this skill set, being able to use Excel. And I don't mean just knowing how Excel works. I mean understanding, like, here's this thing in my life that I want or I'm considering, and here's the absolutely emotion-free facts in regard to this thing. It's not that your emotions are not important in your life's decision. Your passions and your emotions are your driving force in how you do what you do and why you do what you do and what you choose to do. But if you take emotion and passion devoid of logic, fact, and reason, that's how you end up making really bad decisions. For some people it works out, but in many instances, it really, really hurts. And Excel's how we can not find necessarily the path that math says is the best for us, because that's relative to somebody else. But the way that I put it, Excel is a tool to examine what you want, determine if it really is what you want, and then design a way to get it. And I ask you, like, why aren't we teaching children this in, like, at least starting in, like, 5th to 7th grade? Given that's what it is. Determine what you want, make sure it is what you really want, and figure out a way to get it. That's what modeling is. So, going back to the basic thing I'm hearing here isn't so much give me a list of things we can model, but here's some things we want to model, and how do we figure out what we want to include and what we don't want to include. My view is when you're building a model, if you think something might be important, include it. There's this little function called hide, right? So you can put all kinds of shit in your model, and you can then get totals, graphs, etc., that do or do not include that data, as well as just hide it and get it out of the way so you can think without it in your way. So if you think it might be important, it may be important eventually. So why not build it into the model early on? I guess I should talk about my favorite tool when I'm using the tool of Excel, and I'm not sure exactly what I want to do yet. And that tool is not electronic or technology based. I guess it is a technology in a way. I guess dry erase markers are a technology of sorts. It's the whiteboard. And whenever, let's say I decided, hey, I might want to go into this business. Let's say I want to go, maybe I want to grow plants. And I want to just start out with like 8 plants. 8 different plants that I'm going to make clones of, and I'm going to sell, and I'm going to ship. It's pretty straightforward. Honestly, I could do that without modeling it. But what am I trying to determine? Do I actually want to do this? What does it take to do this? And how do I get it? And then I can make a determination like, is my time really best spent cloning lemon balm and mint and putting them in boxes and shipping them out? Or I might determine, boy, I guess, if I start teaching my grandson now, this could be his business in about 2 years. He'll be mature enough to do this, right? How much am I going to make? Is it worth doing? How much do I have? Like all that stuff you need to figure out. So to me, what you then do is you start out on a whiteboard. And I know people use various apps and technologies and stuff to do this electronically. I hate that. I don't even draw well. It's not like I love my own artwork while I'm doing this. To me, there's something about, and I like a big whiteboard. And if you can't afford a big whiteboard, I can't remember what it's called, but there's this material that you can buy pretty cheap for a 4x8 sheet at Home Depot that's basically a whiteboard. You can put it up on a wall in your garage. And being able to stand back and have enough space to kind of map out everything. So we start with a process flow like, okay, so what would we have to do? Well, we would have to first, produce the plants. Okay, so then we need the materials. So we'd have like produce plants, clone plants, however you want to call it, and then materials needed. And then you'd have a list of the materials you needed, right? And then there is a cost associated with that, so that has to be an input, right? And then we need a place to grow out plants. We need a way to package plants, a way to ship plants, a cost of shipping. Like you just kind of process map it. And then you come over here and we're going to make a list of all the things that need to go on our model based on the process map. And this actually isn't hard. I think it's actually an innate human skill that has been suppressed in people. That almost it amazes me, like you go in as a consultant and you do this for a process within a business and they all sit back and go, oh. You're like, you guys run a company. And what I started doing with my clients years ago in doing this is I would bring up one of my clients and let them run. I would just kind of advise as we started going through the process. Because I wanted them to be able to do it. I wanted them off therapy, so to say. Like I didn't want to be the psychologist that you keep coming to 30 years later talking about your problems. I wanted to help you figure out how to process your problem and go on with life in the technical consulting marketing arena, analogy there. So get on a whiteboard and go through this. I also think that since I know other homeschool parents are going to listen to this, or even parents that try to educate at home even though their kids are still in the government school system, will say this is a great thing to teach my kid and something they're probably not going to learn in school. I like to try, whenever possible, to educate children through their own motivations rather than assigning them a motivation. So I just had a flashback right there when I said that. I remember in 10th grade in my literature class, I had to do an oral report on John Steinbeck. And what I ended up doing was like an hour before the class in study hall, I got out an encyclopedia and looked up John Steinbeck. We had encyclopedias back then. Apparently he was big enough to be in, World Book or whatever, or Britannica, whatever it was. And I read that, right? And I read a book that had a little biography about him in it. I took both of those out of the library, went upstairs in the study hall, read them, and dropped them off in the library on the way to literature class. And then I went in there and bullshitted my way through my oral report. I don't remember anything except that he wrote one of his first things on the back of a matchbook or something like that. It was something like that. But I don't really know jack shit about John Steinbeck. And you know why? Because when I was assigned that, I didn't give 2 damn rips about John Steinbeck. And since it only had to be an oral report and I only had to bullshit for 10 minutes, and I'm pretty good at that, I didn't bother to learn because I didn't care. Now, if my teacher had said, pick someone who writes books and tell us the story of how they became an author and what made their work great, I would have went, wow. And I would have went home and I would have gotten my books out by like Robert Rourke. And I would have said, well, I'm going to find out more. And I would have done whatever research was available in 1984, 85, whatever it was. And I would have dug in and learned a lot more. And I would have learned a lot more about research because I would have been motivated because I would have given a shit. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if you want to assign a kid a written assignment, you want them to do an essay on something, then let them write about anything. It doesn't matter what it is. You're teaching the technical skill of writing. So you want to worry about like sentence structure, paragraph length, punctuation, stuff, spelling and things like that. Use of words, and one of the things you can do is like have a kid write something and then say, that's great. Now let's see if we can up it and make it a little bit more sophisticated, sound a little bit more articulate. And then when they look at it and go, what does articulate mean? Make them look it up. And when they come back, we have a discussion about what articulate means. Go ahead and rewrite, like if you give them something like write 10 paragraphs on this thing, rewrite the first paragraph for them so they know what you're doing. And then say, cut loose now. See if you can do what I did. See, and so how do we apply this to Excel? Well, put things in front of them that kids might naturally want, and then let's build a model for that. Because your kids might surprise you, and if you put them on the whiteboard and teach them how to run through that once with something you're very familiar with, and then say, okay, now, Billy, Tommy, Mary, Sue, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to get the whiteboard, and now you're in charge of the whiteboard. We're going to talk about the thing you want, and let's mind map and process flow that out together. Let's come up with the criteria for the spreadsheet, and then you don't judge that criteria. Build the spreadsheet, and then go remap it. Did you miss anything? And then let them determine. And if you see things along the way, make notes and try to lead them there instead of give it to them, if that makes sense. So here's some things that I would think that a kid in that age bracket might be interested in knowing. Have you considered starting your own business? And this is all in kind of one paragraph. What can you do with that business? What would a revenue model look like in that area? Can you do enough volume in it alone as a single sole proprietor? Or would you need to hire employees or contractors? Right, that's an interesting thing right there, right? What would the real cost of an employee be in such a business versus a contractor? How would that affect your COGS, which is your cost of goods sold? And I think once you get kids up to about like the 7th, 8th grade level, use these terms like COGS. And when they go, what's a COG? Right? And make it where it's never a bad thing to ask a question like that, but it's always a bad thing to not know and pretend you do. So if you think they didn't know what you were talking about, you need to ask them what it is. So it's always great when they ask you, but it's not so good when you ask them because you make them do more work to find out. By the way, for those that don't know, that would be cost of goods sold. That's kind of an important thing to know in a business. Because you can do $800,000 worth of sales and lose money if you don't know, what your cost of goods sold is going in. And don't think it doesn't happen. I pulled that number 800,000 out from an actual client who was losing money and had not figured out yet in the year that I was consulting with them that they were actually losing money. That by the end of the year, if their sales doubled, they would lose more money. They had a process problem, not a sales problem. Yeah. How about this? How could you buy a piece of land or your own home and make it pay for itself? That's interesting, isn't it? Don't you think that would be something like, isn't that so valuable that we should be teaching kids that? Like, if kids get out of high school, they should at least have been presented with the question and realize there might be a way. People do it all the time. People do it all the time. What if people went into young adulthood with their first goal being, I need a place to live, and it should pay for itself? So what does that lead us to? What other questions go under that heading? Don't just think about farming. What about Airbnb? You can't live in a place at Airbnb, and, well, maybe you can. If it has like an apartment, that would be one way to get part of the bill paid for. Or Hip Camp. Hip Camp is like Airbnb for camping. So if we got a piece of land and we could put in some tiny homes or some glamping sites or whatever, or even just some few primitive sites, and what would be the basic infrastructure where people would say, hey, this is a good place to camp? What does that look like? What can you come up with to live the way you want for basically free? That should be the goal here when you say make it pay for itself. Like, what do you really want? If you could have any kind of place to live you wanted, is there a way to get that, but basically live there for free, and all of your other income then goes to things like feeding yourself and in saving for your retirement and stuff like that? Why don't we ask kids this in like 10th and 11th grade? Because it's hard to saddle them with a shitload of debt unless they know exactly what they want to do in college and how that makes that happen, right? But you guys already did that. I think I'd ask this question. Does it actually make sense to buy a more expensive property for you based on your goals once we look at this? You might find that buying the typical starter home, there's no real way to make it pay for itself. And it may be buying a much larger home, even if you can't 100% make it pay for itself. Let me put it this way. Would you rather own, your typical starter home, 1,500 to 2,000 square feet in a suburb with a postage stamp lot, and pay, like, I think my son's house payment is somewhere in the $1,500, $1,600 range for about that? Or would you rather have 10 acres in the country with a big house and outbuildings and all that stuff and have that cost you $1,500? Because if it would cost you $3,500, but you can cover $2,000 of it, you're back to paying the same out of pocket, but you have a lot more house, and that income is paying down your loan against the property and hence going into your equity and your long-term wealth. So you actually have more and pay less. And then if we can get it there, can we keep working it till we get it down to zero? Or if it's $500, do you not give two craps? Right? If it's $500 a month to live in a place like that, and your buddy's out renting a place with a one bedroom for $1,200, how much better off are you? Plus, now that we have a business revenue against the property, what other things become expensible? And since those other things became expensible, how does that reduce your income tax? And now if we throw that money at the house, all of a sudden it actually is paying for itself. See, once we start knowing what we want to do, then we start figuring out what do we need to know about it. How do you get financing to buy it? How can you convince an investor that they should give you the money you need? If my son had come to me when he wanted to buy his house and said, we want to buy a house for $165,000. The bank wants 10% down. I'll give you 10% down. You loan me the money and give me an interest rate comparable to the bank. I would have said no. Absolutely not. There's nothing for me in that. I'm sorry, you're my son. I love you, but I can make more money with less risk doing other things with, my 150 grand. Plus, you don't need me for that. You'll qualify for a loan, and I don't have to give up my capital so you can go get the loan. But if you'd come to me and said, well, what I'd like to do is borrow the money from you instead of the bank. I'll pay you twice the interest rate of the bank, but I'll pay the loan off in only 5 years. Here's my business plan to get it done. Here's my spreadsheet. Here's all the things that I'm going to do, and here's my forecast. And I looked at it, and it made sense. I don't know if I would have done it, but I would have given it serious consideration. That's how any investor looks at an investment. Can I make more doing this than otherwise with less risk? And I would be more likely to say yes to that from somebody I just knew than my son, because I'm not going to evict my son. I will evict Fred down the street who had a solid plan and failed, right? Because I'm going to take the house in collateral. So those are all things to put into, your model. How about this one? Do you want a car? How about the easy thing? Kids always want cars. I don't know how that's going to be the same in 15 years from now when everything's autonomous electric vehicles. But, right now, a kid that's 15, 16 years old, do you want a car? Which is better? Buying it or leasing it? Or buying used? Is it better to buy a beater? What's the cost of insurance? How are you going to pay for it? See, anything like that. And see, it might be better to start out with something simple like, how do I get a car? How do I get a car? What's the cost of the car? What's the maintenance cost on a car? Gas? How often, on average, do things need to be replaced on a car like that? How long do I see myself keeping this car before I go to another car? This all comes from simply taking the thing and laying out all the things about it that are important to you, timelines, costs, and when you don't know, you use percentages and you guess. That's the hardest thing to teach somebody, to be willing to estimate, to be willing to say the odds of this happen are 70% or 60% or 50%, and then figure out how to work that into your math. Now, I'll tell you what, folks, everybody should learn this. But you turn a young person loose with this shit about the time most young people are, going into college, and you've got something really powerful. With that, I'll catch up with you next week with another episode of Miyagi Mornings. Remember, you can catch the Miyagi Mornings recap podcast. It will be out tomorrow with all of this week's episodes, and you can find my entire podcast at tspc.co.